As everyone settles in, if you had a red object that was left in the women's bathroom today, feel free to come to me. It is a cell phone. It is a cell phone. And Jill, I believe, has it in her possession, if you realize you've lost it.
Yeah, someone left an iPhone in a red case in the women's lounge. So we've already taken off. Purple? Purple case. Jill's holding it up. We've already taken off all the credit card information and all that. So no need to worry.
Oh, they walked out already, right? Yeah. And you can, if you put your face in front of it and it opens up, we know it's yours.
We've also checked. It is eligible for an upgrade, so you can.
So we want to begin our conversation today. And first, we'd like to introduce Howard Libet. As I mentioned earlier, he's the executive director of our Baltimore Jewish Council. And Howard, thank you for being here with us this morning, or this afternoon.
Thanks, my pleasure to be here.
So Howard, we were hoping that you could actually just start our conversation today with a little bit of an introduction. For anyone who's here today that might not know about the work that BJC does in our community, can you share a little bit about yourself and also a little bit about BJC?
Absolutely. So the Baltimore Jewish Council is kind of the advocacy arm of our Jewish community. We're an agency of the Associated, so thank you to everyone who supports the Associated campaign each year that pays for it, helps pay for our work. We kind of have more or less 4 buckets we work in. We are, a big part of it is advocacy. That's both legislative advocacy, working in Annapolis, working at the state and county level, at the city and county level, working at the federal government, lobbying for dollars that support our broader community. Lobbying for dollars that support our broader community, but also on laws that are relevant to us specifically, hate crimes laws, and broader ones that are important to the work we as a Jewish community do in areas like helping people who are hungry, helping people in our seniors, advocating for resources for Holocaust survivors. We also work on both interfaith and intra-faith relations. We try and build relationships with other communities across the region, which of course is particularly relevant as we talk about anti-Semitism, and also build deeper relationships across our Jewish communities. I know we as a Jewish community collectively know there's not really one Jewish community, there's many, and building ties between the Reform, the Orthodox, conservative, and those who are unaffiliated and are more secular. But we all have shared values that we need to remember, and that our differences are not that great. We need to work together as a community. And fortunately, here in Baltimore, we have a pretty good reputation and reality of our different Jewish communities being on the same page. And then we have a broad bucket that ranging from Israel advocacy, Israel education, and the Jewish community, Jewish advocacy. The director of security for the community is on our staff, a retired Baltimore City police major who I know works with this synagogue and ones across the region and the schools and the other institutions, and at times even the mosques when they want help with it, do an assessment of how to improve their security. And we regularly consult and respond and have an extensive alert system. Again, a really relevant point with anti-Semitism. And as well as working on Holocaust education or remembrance, side by side with anti-Semitism. The annual community commemoration of Kristallnacht and Yom HaShoah come through us. We collaborate with the Jewish Museum of Maryland to run training institutes for teachers across the state. We do a lot of education of Holocaust for students. We actually, there's an annual program every year at the John Carroll School, a Catholic school in Harford County, that brings in hundreds of students from across the region, public and private, to learn about the Holocaust. Really meaningful experiences to reach out. And then the last other piece is the Elijah Cummings Youth Program in Israel, which many of you may have heard of, a 2-year fellowship for about 12 or 13 students per year, mostly students of color, who participate in community service, leadership, spend the summer between their junior and senior year of high school in Israel learning and come back and talk about it, and also more recently pair up with Jewish teens and spend a year learning about our shared histories of the Black and Jewish communities in Baltimore and exploring social justice issues. My son is actually doing it this year. The end result are some really cool podcasts they've been doing in conjunction under the supervision of a producer from WYPR. So sorry, I probably talked too much about everything we do.
So Howard, thank you for that. What we want to ask you to do next, before we all jump into a shared conversation, is will you give us a lay of the land in terms of anti-Semitism now, today? And what I mean specifically is, what are you seeing in our own community, right here, where we all, where we live, where we call our home? What are you seeing across the country? And then if you could grow that and just saying, like, what are the trends that you're seeing in terms of anti-Semitism in the world today?
So it's not going to surprise anyone to tell you that the statistics are up. The number of reported incidents are up, and I think the number of unreported incidents are up far more, whether it's going to the ADL annual survey or the Maryland State Police FBI data of actual criminal incidents that are related to hate incidents. And to be fair, the incidents like the shooting in Pittsburgh or the shooting in Poway are few and far between, thank goodness. We have devoted tons of resources to thinking about that security. But the number of incidents of assaults on the streets of New York, the graffiti, the car getting scratched with a swastika, a sign being defaced, that is also up a lot. And lots of it never gets reported to anybody. I wish it would more. And then day to day when you talk to people, there are, of course, just, you hear from people, the grocery clerk who says something after an observant Jew finishes up through the grocery line, and you hear that comment, and they don't know, the clerk doesn't know you're Jewish because you may not be wearing a yarmulke, but you hear this comment. And it happens, it's happening more and more, unfortunately, and we're hearing it, we're all seeing it, we're all feeling it. The statistics of the number of American Jews who have changed their behavior because of their fear of anti-Semitism. They may not wear the Star of David outside their shirt. They may wear it underneath their shirt because they don't want to show people. Those numbers are up too from the annual surveys from AJC. Let me give you just a brief glimpse of the last week and a half of anti-Semitism that I've dealt with in Baltimore, just to give you and it's been a remarkable surge that I don't know. I think it's just randomness, but it's been a week. It's been a week. So I'll start with 2 weeks ago, the Ravens signed a wide receiver named Deshaun Jackson. Some of you may recall 2 years ago when he was with the Philadelphia Eagles, he expressed some terrible anti-Semitic things on social media. And I immediately got some phone calls asking, are you guys going to speak out and criticize this signing? And initially we're thinking, what should we do? We went and did our homework though. He actually, at the time, he apologized fairly quickly. He made a trip to the Holocaust Museum with a wide receiver from the Patriots who's Jewish. Edelman? Yes, Edelman took him to, and we checked with our friends in Philadelphia, and they're like, it's old news. He really did learn from it. And part of dealing with anti-Semitism is being willing to accept apologies, being willing to embrace people who show their learning. So, and Steve here among others, who's on my my board of governors, excuse me, we kind of collectively said we're not going to say anything because you're not forever branded an anti-Semite if you've shown genuine contrition and apology. Then a couple days later, the next incident. Many of you are probably aware of the fight at Johns Hopkins University over a police force. So some of the activists opposing it posted on social media a meme with the president of Hopkins with horns, looking like the devil. The Jewish president of Johns Hopkins looking like the devil with horns. Ron Daniels, yes. And that tweet was then shared. And the activists, many of them, I'm sure student activists, may not have any idea of the history of that as an anti-Semitic trope. And then the ACLU of Maryland retweeted it. They should know better, right? So, I was hearing, and Hopkins reached out to me, and we've had experiences with anti-Semitism, of course, on Hopkins, like on every other campus in the area. And they reached out, and we talked, and I just decided I'm going to call. Like, they weren't hearing. ACLU of Maryland took down the tweet, but that wasn't really good enough. So I called and had a conversation with the executive director, who was apologetic and acknowledged across the line, but I also offered, would you like me to come by and do a training for your staff to talk about anti-Semitism? That wasn't embraced, not yet at least. We're going to work on her a little more. Also this week, I got an opportunity to go, my director of combating anti-Semitism, and I got to go spend Wednesday lunchtime at a major law firm downtown, teaching them and talking to them for an hour about anti-Semitism. They reached out to us asking us to help teach them as part of their diversity, equity, inclusion lunchtime series. Really a wonderful opportunity. It's the law firm that represents the Catholic Church. And then in a couple Sundays from now, they're going to join us doing a cleanup on a Sunday morning at the Holocaust Memorial downtown. That filled me with good spirits. And then, of course, we saw with the Kanye West stuff and our friend Torrey Smith, the Super Bowl winning wide receiver from the team, retired now, tweeting kind of in support of Kanye and saying some things on Twitter that were anti-Semitic, and was 2 days of talking him into ultimately apologizing for what he said and helping him learn and helping him come to grips with why what he said was offensive. Been a long week. Not to mention all the other stuff we're seeing nationally and the concerns and the threats. And there was a number of institutions across the country got a bunch of threatening emails at one point this week. I had none in Baltimore, but in a handful of other states. And so we're reacting to that and thinking about what that might mean. And then, what was it? Early Friday morning, the attack on the speaker's husband, Paul Pelosi, and apparently the anti-Semitic ravings on the internet from the alleged attacker, among other hate-filled speech. So I wish and then I guess I would just also say this fall or since last spring on every campus that here in the region, we've dealt with anti-Semitism in some form. And I know that doesn't surprise any of you with kids or grandkids in college. You're all hearing it all the time. We're all trying to work on it.
So Howard, let's go there first as a starting place, but let's talk about what's happening on college campuses. I know that we could sort of look to California as a bit of an anomaly. Perhaps they are more extreme in some of the things that are happening out there, but we are seeing a trend across college campuses from California to New York and everywhere in between, that there is an intolerance toward Israel, that there is an exclusion of Jews that support Israel, that Jews have to make a choice on many campuses about whether they want to be progressive or Zionists, and that a lot of Jews don't feel very comfortable right now. A lot of it's coming from their professors in the classrooms, but a lot of it's coming from a very quiet acquiescence in terms of these behaviors and sort of that spirit of campuses today. So can you talk a little bit about campuses?
I mean, we have a campus here in our region. I'm not going to identify because it's not publicly out there yet, but students actively involved with the Hillel on that campus. A couple of them are also in the leadership of the campus LGBTQ organization. And basically, they were given an ultimatum that they couldn't be involved in the leadership of that group if they continued to be Zionists and supportive of Israel. Terrible choice, as you say. And the campus has stepped up and is working and is acknowledging that is anti-Semitic, that is not, that students should be able to practice their faith, support their faith, be engaged in supporting Israel, and not be forced out of other progressive organizations. Last fall, so a year ago, we brought together the campus diversity officers, basically, of all all the campuses that have Hillels in our region, the four of them up here plus College Park, and set up a Zoom meeting with the Hillels and the folks involved in campus diversity. Just asked for an hour to talk about anti-Semitism, to explain it to them, and to make a case that as they do their diversity and equity training for students, for staff, for faculty, anti-Semitism needs to be at the table. We have found too many times that campus diversity offices, when they think of who their charge is to protect, they think of every other group except the Jews, because the perception is that Jews generally are white and privileged and aren't like people of color, aren't like students of the LGBTQ community, aren't Muslim. We have it good. And we've had to explain to them the persistent and growing anti-Semitism, and it's paying off. A couple of the campuses brought anti-Semitism in this past summer, and they're talking to their Hillel folks more and acknowledging it as an issue, and they're responding. It's not where it should be yet, but we're starting to get there. The Goucher president, I don't know if he is right now looking at or has sent out, I haven't seen it yet, a statement condemning anti-Semitism, kind of in light of what seeing with Kanye West and everything, and is very much wanting to get out there on it. It's starting to improve, but it is a tough environment, and I know that for college students, which I know why so many institutions around here say, how do we prepare our high school kids when they go off? And how do we prepare our high school parents when their kids go off to college and want to know, and their child calls with an issue? How do you tell them how to respond?
Howard, in terms of the campus issue, maybe reflect for a few minutes on the sort of blurring or blending that happens there between anti-Israel sentiment, criticism of Israel in terms of political policy, et cetera, and then anti-Semitism itself, and how those things get conflated.
It has become, we all believe that, or not everybody, but many of us, it's okay to criticize Israel as a country like you might criticize any other country for its actions. But too many hold up Israel as something for unique forms of criticism, above and beyond, or they use Nazi tropes. They describe what the Israelis are doing to Palestinians as equivalent to concentration camps or the Holocaust, and that is anti-Semitism. But you see someone supporting Israel, an organization sending students over there as birthright, being criticized as, you are supporting an apartheid state, and people are, and that's what our kids are facing. They can't wear something like this with the Israeli flag without being called supporters of an apartheid state, and it does get mixed up. Now there's the anti-Semitism, the comments you hear, Jews and money, Jews and power, all of that, a whole other area of anti-Semitism. The Israel criticism and where it crosses the line, and the idea that if you support that Jews are responsible for anything Israel does, is really difficult. I heard an interesting, after Gaza, the recent violence in Gaza, and there was like the Associated Press building that was blown up, and things really got tense on college campuses for a number of students because of kind of that particular conflict. And part of that is the Israelis not doing a good enough job of communicating about what they're doing and why, and our kids on campuses end up bearing the brunt of it. They're actually I've heard them describe making a more concerted effort when something happens. They're going to show proof quickly. When some of the children were killed in some of the more recent bombing, they very quickly showed how it was failed Palestinian missiles that were responsible, not the Israelis. And it ultimately has a little bit of help on the campus, because every time there's a flare-up in Israel, the campuses get involved. And unfortunately, you even see some of the departments on campuses using their social media to criticize Israel from time to time. And if you're a student learning in that area of the university, it's terrible. It makes you feel like the faculty teaching me have it out for me. And I've heard that. UMBC campus has experienced some of that with a couple of departments specifically sending out social media on official university accounts.
And then you have what we've seen at UCal Berkeley Law School, right, over the last couple of months, where actually in some of the bylaws of some of the appointed organizations of the law school, changes made to the bylaws whereby someone who expresses quote unquote Zionist sentiment should not be allowed to publicly speak, publicly express views. And in effect, what you're doing there is you're saying to someone, if you're Jewish, you can't participate in campus dialogue and campus life. That's that kind of classic blending and bleeding together of those things.
Actually, Rabbi Schwartz, I think it becomes even more complicated because what you're forcing a Jew to do if they want to be able to speak is to disassociate themselves from Israel, which creates a very problematic space that you have to actually prove that you not only don't care about Israel, but that you actively oppose Israel, and not only its policies, but the entity, which is really an unbelievably difficult and terrible position to be in.
Let me also take a step back just for some of what you all read or the emails you receive and just give a little bit of a reality check. There are a number of small organizations across the country that very much want to inflate every potential incident for the benefit of their fundraising. They want to be the most they want to be the loudest voice calling it out, followed by their fundraising appeal that they're protecting your kids on campus. So there are times where an incident is being handled in a smart, efficient way that is educational, and then one of these organizations finds out and it blows up, and they're looking, and so it's a challenging situation. And I appreciate there are times when we need the loud voices and we need the people who want to, stop making donations to this college till they halt their anti-Semitism. But then there are times where we also need to work inside the system to educate and give people the space to learn and apologize without feeling like they're under threat.
And it's an interesting thing that you say, Howard, because in some ways, right, the headline on that particular case was "No Jew Zone," right? That was how it was reported. And then they stepped it back to say, that actually isn't exactly what it is, but what it turned out to be still turned out to be problematic at Berkeley. So how does Berkeley, just as one of many examples, what do you think as someone who works in this field of advocacy and community, taking care of the Jewish community and its safety? How do you think that, what have you seen as the most effective ways to respond to what's happening on campuses in order to protect our kids and to create a safer, more comfortable space for them?
That's an easy question.
Wow. I think I will say, number one, for those campuses that have Hillels, the Hillels are the best place. So I've got to celebrate the Hillels and the directors we have here and if you send children, and when I send my kids off to college, the first one in a year and a half from now, I'm going to make sure they go to Hillel, because having that space and the professionals there who can help talk you through it is hugely important. But then the other piece is us as a outside community engaging with the universities proactively before the incident happens, so that when an incident happens, because it will, they're comfortable calling. They're comfortable calling me and saying, hey, this happened. Give me advice on how to respond in a way where the students, the parents, the faculty, the staff are going to feel welcomed and embraced. I mean, I've had universities around here reach out and say, here's the statement we intend to send out. Is there anything that we're missing? I'm like, well, you ought to say, if you encounter an incident of anti-Semitism, here's where to go to report it. You ought to remind people of the investment you're making in security. Those kinds of things. And it's not, they don't think about it. It's not intentional, But if we're having that dialogue in advance, if we're not having that dialogue after the incident happens, that's really positive. So, some of you may remember a couple of years ago, before the pandemic, so maybe it was 10 years, who knows anymore. There was the incident outside a fraternity house, or some fraternity students at Towson were assaulted one night coming home, and it was late, and I'm sure there was alcohol involved, but there were some anti-Semitic slurs used as part of it. And I'll tell you, a couple days later, that fraternity organized a rally, and the university president showed up, and there were probably 300 people there, and the leadership making that statement, too, makes a huge difference. There's a new president at UMBC. The Hillel director there's already talked to her about, join us at a Hanukkah celebration, join us in our sukkah, come out and make statements with the Jewish community, show the Jewish community that leadership is with us, makes a difference, and also sends a message to the rest of the community that anti-Semitism isn't going to be tolerated. It's not going to solve all of it, but it makes that feeling is good. Because really, as much as we want to focus on the incidents, our campuses around here still are generally pretty welcoming places for our Jewish students. Yes, we hear the little things from time to time, and that's what we want to focus on. But we have lots and lots of Jewish students on our campuses who are living and thriving and feeling safe. And that's really important to remember, too.
Just to kind of shift the topic, when I was growing up, the anti-Semitism I experienced was like what you were just talking about in terms of a group of students being assaulted, beat up. I mean, it was blatant, it was ugly, it was physical, or verbal, and it was abusive in that kind of way. It was not subtle. It was not subtle, and I think part of what's happened over the last quarter century, maybe a little bit longer than that, is that there's this sort of insidious subtleness in anti-Semitism now. It's veiled, it's cloaked under other forms that are considered to be on the surface acceptable, and it's a way of sneaking things in almost through the back door. And I don't know if it's new, but it seems to me to be something that's new, and there's a danger to that too.
I would agree. There's a danger to that, and then I think the blatant anti-Semitism that from a couple of decades ago diminished for a fair amount, and then in the last few years has also picked up again too, in addition to the insidious. Like I think we are seeing this surge, a coarsening of our political dialogue is driving it. Across all political viewpoints, the left, the right, the center, we're seeing it, and we're seeing it's not just anti-Semitism, hate to many groups. We're not unique in that, and that's something we have to remember too. Is we have to be allies to everyone else who's experiencing hate, so they'll stand with us.
You and Rabbi Schwartz both mentioned earlier some of our sports teams and what's going on there. I feel like we sort of have we have the college campuses as one realm. We have another which has been like the playing fields, right, in the world of sports. And then we also have, entertainment, and the truth is that when my kids who are similarly aged to yours, when they're scrolling on Instagram or Snapchat, they're reading a lot of things, a lot of comments out there, Gideon in the realm of sports, and my girls in terms of like what the Kardashians and the, and all of the influencers out there are saying. So I'm just wondering if you let's go to the Kanye West thing actually, why not?
Sure.
So, so everyone probably has followed Kanye West, made anti-Semitic statements recently. He thought he was going to stand strong in his contract with Adidas. Adidas pulled the contract. It was a big deal. Kanye did not apologize, which goes back to your original sort of ideas with Deshaun Jackson, which was like, we have seen a pattern of someone makes an unacceptable anti-Semitic statement. The Jewish community calls them out on it. They say they're sorry. They go to the Holocaust Museum or meet with some, leader within the Jewish community, who teaches them otherwise, and then we forgive, right? That's our pattern, pretty much. And
Yeah, we try to get
we try. That's our ideal pattern. We like that pattern. It feels super comfortable. But then all of a sudden, along comes Kanye or Ye, whoever he wants to say his name this week. He comes along and he says, nope.
Could just call him Boo, not Yay. Boo.
It's actually clever. So he comes along and says, actually, I'm not going to apologize. And we're like, what? That totally disrupts the pattern of things as they're supposed to be. So now what? And does his refusing to learn, grow, say sorry, make amends, what does that do to sort of the future of this cycle that we've grown comfortable with?
So there are people who don't want to apologize. They think they're right. And him being the most obvious one lately, I mean, I think of there was a Washington, D.C. city councilman who said things about Jews controlling the weather and all, and my counterpart agency took him on a tour of the Holocaust Museum to try and teach about anti-Semitism. He ducked out 20 minutes into the tour and just never apologized. And his apology was, he was going to go to a Seder, he skipped it. So you continue to condemn, and it's complicated. Kanye West, so I've been thinking so much about this situation, and also about the number of people, including Tory Smith, who have weighed in on it in ways that some of us perceive to be anti-Semitic. And let me go on a bit of a tangent. Kanye West has been spewing hate speech for many years against blacks, against a lot of other groups. And now, when he made some very violent threats against the Jewish community and all, suddenly now Adidas is dropping him. And so there are some in the black community who are like, well, when he was saying all these things against the black community and against everybody else, why weren't the companies dropping him then? Why is it only when he spoke out against the Jews? Now, there's different ways to think about it. What he said, the violent threats he made against the Jewish community kind of were a step up from the other hate speech he's made over the years. Some people have said, well, it's because the Jews have power, which drives the anti-Semitic talk. Now, I will concede, we're better organized to call out anti-Semitism than many other groups. We have ADL, we have organizations like mine. We can respond in a more collective way. But I'm also thinking, as I've been thinking about it the last 2 years, should we have been joining with our allies in other communities and more actively calling out Kanye West 2 years ago when he was saying things like slavery wasn't so bad, or slavery was a choice, or things like that? Maybe we weren't being active enough in support of our allies at the time, and when it hit home, we spoke out in a coordinated way. Or maybe it's just that the time as we approach an election, finally, and the years of hate just kind of added up, and finally just Adidas and others had their fill of it, and it just, the Jewish groups his attacks on Jews happened to be the proximate hate group, but could have been it just was they were tired of dealing with his hate speech. I don't have an answer there, except to say I am reflecting a lot on we need to speak out more aggressively and earlier when other groups are under attack too. Not excusing anyone who is saying Kanye shouldn't have been dumped and that the Jews used too much power or anything like that. That has all the anti-Semitic tropes in it. But we need to speak out more aggressively earlier when we see others under attack from people like Kanye.
Yeah, Howard, you've referenced that idea a couple of times today, so appreciate that. And to me, it's that old idea of the rising tide lifts all boats, and the opposite is also true. And in a world where there's more hate will be directed at Jews. So if you diminish hate in general, less hate will be directed at Jews. I think it's a pretty simple equation. The challenge in the Jewish community is to remember that. We're not on an island by ourselves. This is a problem that's happening all around the world, directed at all different kinds of groups.
When there's the Muslim community here is attacked, or the Asian community here is attacked, if I get a call, there's going to be a public press conference or something, I'm going to do my best to get there. And then when we had, you may remember, what was it, July 4th weekend 2021, when we found a bunch of gravestones in one of the old German Hill Road cemeteries over in southeast Baltimore near Dundalk, defaced with swastikas. We pulled together a press conference in about 2 days. There was the number 2 from the Catholic Church. There were black ministers. There was represents the Muslim community, a lot of elected officials, all standing there in the early July heat, condemning hate and joining with us. Really a powerful image, and we need to continue to build that across, because we, what is it? The Jewish community is what, 2% of America? We can't, without the help of everyone, we can't survive on our own. We know that. There was a powerful column in the Washington Post this morning that was just, that dove into the idea of more American Jews thinking about where do we go if this country turns on us. I don't want to think like that, but that's...
We have some questions. I just saw a lot of hands shoot up. We had 2 more questions that we were going to ask. Why don't we go to one question and then we'll go to everyone else's question? How's that? Okay. Last question for you. It's elections or midterm elections are coming up. We are thinking a lot about politics. We've got issues on the left. We've got issues on the right. I don't want you to say which are more in need of our energy. I just want you to say, like, for anyone who sits on the left and looks to the right, and anyone who sits on the right and looks to the left, can you just sort of say where you see the issues on both sides of the political spectrum?
Sure. Yes, without getting too political. So, I mean, clearly...
I'm going to get a cup of coffee. I'll be back.
Clearly, on the right, the surge of white nationalism and the embracing of that has happened by some on the right has become hugely troubling and is driving some of the more driving some of the concerns about violence. I mean, that is the place where more violence is happening. Not all violence in the political spectrum, but more of it. And on the left, we are seeing both the choice that progressive groups are sometimes forcing people to make between supporting Israel and supporting progressive causes. And also, we do also see those anti-Semitic tropes coming out on the left of Israel's an apartheid state, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's, we have to win both. We have to win and the center, that we can't let and if you're on the left, you need to call out the anti-Semitism you see on the left just as much as you call it out on the right, because it's not a one side of the or the other. And if you're on the right, you have to stand up and call it out on the right. None of it is acceptable. And that's the only way we're gonna get through this political time.
We're going to turn to you all now. Rabbi Schwartz is, it's going to hurt me to choose. You want to be the chooser?
Go ahead, Susan.
Said she was going to make a statement. And then we'll go to questions. We're going to let you make a statement, but then we're going to ask people to refrain from statements and do questions.
My great niece, who is a member of Bethel, and so is her entire family, goes to University of Baltimore Law School. She and her boyfriend started a Jewish group there. They never had one before, but what they do is they have Friday night Shabbos dinner, they have brunches, but they also open it up to non-Jews as well. And it has been extremely successful. That's Sarah Steinberg.
I will just tell you, like, one thing that's happened more pre-pandemic was the Hillels have done a good job of taking trips to Israel with other non-Jewish campus leaders to try and help teach them about Israel. I think bringing in non-Jewish leaders on campus, students on campus, also helps build that understanding.
Forgive me for doing this. I'm going to just say anything with a question mark at the end. Good. Questions, questions, questions. I'm going to go to Joyce, then to Art, then to Andrea, then circle.
Well, many of us come from the generation of Jewish families where the key words were Shah still. We're just beginning, I think, to feel comfortable enough in speaking out. But by a show of hands, how many people came from the generation of Jewish people have to be Shah still? Do you know?
Okay, great comments. Again, I'm just going to reiterate question marks. Question marks on the end. Questions?
Okay, so I've been listening to you. Rabbi Sorokin really hit the target when she said the circular pattern that you've been doing. Oh, okay. So, somebody says something anti-Semitic, and then you go and you have a meet and greet, and then they apologize, and, everything's hunky-dory and everybody forgets about it. The difference with Kanye West, though, was that when Adidas cut him off, he lost $1 billion. That really hurt. Well, whatever it was, $1 billion, $2 billion. I mean, that's a lot of money. Then he goes over to Skitters, and they lock the door in front of his face. Economic pressure on these people that are speaking up so violently is effective. And why aren't we doing more in that area and pulling support from departments that espouse anti-Semitic remarks or push anti-Semitic ideas? We have a tremendous amount of influence, even though we're only 2%. Why can't we use it?
I would say that we do when there are repeated incidents of anti-Semitism. We first try and educate and help and encourage. The first time someone says or does something anti-Semitic, oftentimes it's out of ignorance, not out of hate. We need to sort through that. When you see a repeated pattern, when you see someone goes through, as you said, the cycle, and then if they repeat it again, like Kanye West, repeatedly making hate speech, I think cutting off the contract, absolutely, economic pressure, whatever it is. I know a number of people who, when Ben & Jerry's, for example, stopped selling ice cream, said they were going to pull out of selling ice cream in the territories. A number of people stopped buying Ben & Jerry's ice cream. Now, do I think that us, whatever number of people who didn't do that, changed things? I don't know, but there was a lot of pressure then on their parent company. And now their changes happen with economic pressure. I agree. But first you have to try and get people to be educated, to embrace their apology, give them an opportunity. If you brand people as anti-Semitic just because they've said one bad thing out of ignorance, we're going to lose a lot of people in this world who might be our allies. So the JCRC of Greater Washington did in fact issue some statements and continue to put pressure on him, to the DC Council for some of what he was saying. They did not let up once they gave him his opportunity, and he kept turning his back on them.
Okay, our next question is from Andrea Hyatt.
So a few minutes ago, Bruce turned around to me and he said, "Look around the room. What's wrong with this picture?" And I said, "The average age is 60 and up." And my question is, for both of our rabbis, is what can Bethel do? Obviously, there's numerous reasons. My own children, who they're not here on a Saturday at noontime, listening to this and getting educated. And is there some programming that we can do for the parents, for the Hebrew school, for the preschool, for the infant and toddler program? Because they really need to hear this. I don't think that generation, some of them I think are just fed up. I think others are just feeling hopeless as far as anything going forward in the country. And they're the ones that are raising the next generation of the Jews.
So a couple of things, Andrea, on that. One is that this program is being streamed live right now. You can wave to the camera back there. Folks are watching at home on the Bethel Facebook page. But in all likelihood, we'll keep this program available in video archives so that folks, and in fact, what we may do after reviewing the program is we can send an email with a link to the program to our preschool families, to our Hebrew school families, and say, this is a program, discussion of anti-Semitism, pertinent contemporary issues, why don't you check it out? So that's one piece of that puzzle. Second thing is we do, with our Lapid students, so these are the students who are 7th graders and in their bar and bat mitzvah year, we always have at least one session, and not uncommonly 2 sessions, where we talk with them about anti-Semitism. Where does it come from? What does it mean? What is it all about? Those are amazing conversations, astonishing conversations, actually. I remember one conversation with the kids was the end of last year in the spring, talking about anti-Semitism, and I asked so again, 7th graders, they've grown up in Baltimore, and I said to them, have you ever heard the word kike? Not one of them had ever heard it. Not one of them had any idea what it meant. Not one. Not one.
Our 3 children grew up in this beautiful community, the community of Bethel and of Pikesville, and I think in some ways they were very unprepared for going away to college where they're not coming from this area that's such a high concentrate of Jewish population. And I think that we need to find ways to prepare them for those conversations they hear, and for parents who are raising young kids but might hear it when they're with their kids outside of this community.
Right. And so, like Howard's been saying, it really does get back to education. There's education that the Jewish community needs to provide for the non-Jewish community, and there's internal education that we need in the Jewish community so that our young people, our young families are prepared for these conversations when anti-Semitic incidents arise, as Howard said, and they will, are prepared to deal with those, understand how to navigate them.
I'll even offer now, and I'm sure I won't regret this later. You want me to come on a Sunday morning during Sunday school and tell parents, put out coffee and we could talk about anti-Semitism for an hour with parents as their kids.
Tomorrow morning, 7:30.
My flight to Chicago for JFNA is at 6:30. Sorry, but I'm happy to do that. I know, actually, our director of Holocaust and Countering Anti-Semitism Programming. We actually have someone with that position. Next week, she's, I think Hizek Amuno, for example, has a youth group that meets, there's like 30, 40 kids a couple times a month. She's talking to them about anti-Semitism next week. We're happy to do things like that and interact as we can, as much as we can get scheduled, because I agree, the training's important. I know the Associated has also done some parent sessions partnering with, I think it's an organization, is it Israel High? Something like that, some training sessions. We actually, during Zoom, they launched some, they piloted it here, and I will say one of my great regrets was looking around the Zoom room as we were showing these videos for kids and how to react. Most of the Zoom windows looked like this room. It was the grandparents who were on and the people who, are worried about the campus, but we didn't get enough kids, and we've got to figure out, you all have to figure out, how do you get your kids and grandkids to show up, even just once?
And I think, actually, Howard, to get to Andrea's point and then to yours as well, I think in many ways, Andrea, we have actually offered programs over the course of all of my years here. We have offered programs for high school students, right, in hopes that we could better prepare them for what they are about to encounter on campuses coming from the Pikesville Jewish bubble. But I think until you see anti-Semitism up close, it feels like it's something that's not relevant to you or that you don't need to be trained in. And then once you experience it, you feel like, now I understand that I need to start to do some learning. I also want to follow up to say, though, that might be changing now in an Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter-filled world that our kids are seeing, that I think it's become a little closer, and I think that they are understanding that even on social media, they are being, they are feeling like they should respond and they're not exactly sure how. So maybe it's our time to sort of seize this moment and to try to run another training program or education program. Challenge accepted, game on. I did see, yes, I'm coming back with more questions. And for anyone who has an afternoon date, we'll do a few more questions.
Hi, I just wanted to find out how you would react to this situation. So yesterday, Alan and I were walking into Lenny's, and there were two men, kind of young, maybe 30s, sitting outside of Lenny's, and they looked like Chabad men with the big hats and everything, Hasidic. So one of them, as we're walking in, they addressed Alan, and they said, "Are you Jewish?" And Alan said, "Yes." And then they said, "Would you like to put on tefillin?" And he said, "No, not now." When we walked into Lenny's, so I said to him that because of everything going on in New York, and you hear people actually dressed up as these Hasidic people, and then you say, "Yes, I'm Jewish," and then they beat you up. So I said I would not have admitted that, and I would not have engaged with these men. How would you have handled that? This is a true story that happened yesterday.
I want to first say that that exact same thing happened to me going in to see the Grateful Dead in Hampton, Virginia in 1984. That's true, actually. Chabad had a table set up. Said, "You Jewish? You Jewish?" I think I put the tefillin on, actually. I don't remember.
That exact thing happened to my son when he visited the Western Wall last summer during his camp trip to Israel, and I have these pictures of him. I haven't heard the way you suggested it, that version of people dressed as Chabad and then beating you up if you acknowledge being Jewish. Boy, that's interesting. I guess in this community, I don't have, I mean, if we get to a point where we're scared to admit we're Jewish, boy, we've really failed. That's a really depressing thought. I don't have a great answer because I don't feel, as much as we talk about security and all that, I've never once felt like I have to, in this community, felt like I have to hide being Jewish or not acknowledge it. And we're in a safe community, but we're in a community where law enforcement's very responsible, very responsive, and all of that. I'll admit, your scenario has put me at a little bit of a loss.
How do you do it? Yep, you got it. Keep going. I'm so sorry, because I can't put this in a form of a question. I just have to say, I have always lived my life standing firm, saying I'm Jewish, doing that to raising my children that way, adult children who now have children, to teach that sometimes it's not anti-Semitism, it's ignorance, and they benefited. So just please stand up for being Jewish and go home and tell your children, your grandchildren, talk about this, make them accountable, help them be better Jews. Sorry, I'm crazed because I wanted answers, and I just want us to bring it down to our community. It was your sermon this year. You talked about we can't change a country, we can't blah, 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 blah. We can change ourselves by engaging with people who are not Jewish. Show them we're Jewish, and it's good.
All right, I think we have a final question over here.
Hi, can you hear me? So we actually are neighbors, but don't belong to this shul. We belong to the other shul that will not be named across the parking lot. But the topic is important, so we came to participate. I had a question, though, that relates to the idea of cancel culture, which is kind of what's going on with the Kanye story, but also with the UC Berkeley Law School story. It's actually going on close to home. One of our two of our children, but one of them goes to Park, and there was a petition going around Park to ban a book from literature, which is a great book by a great literary author who happens to have anti-Israel views, not blatantly anti-Semitic views, but does not believe in the politics of Israel. So there's a petition amongst some of the Jewish students, primarily circulating, to ban the book from the curriculum. So I want to know what your comment is about that dangerous line, or I perceive as a dangerous line, between anti-Semitism on one side, but cancel culture on the other. And I'm not suggesting that Kanye shouldn't have been canceled. I'm really ecstatic that he was, but so was the person who was trying to speak at UC Berkeley, canceled because they supported Israel. So I think it's a dangerous line that we're all kind of walking right up to. I'm curious how you feel about that.
Well, I think to speak to your last point first, clearly there's a difference between someone spewing hate and saying they're not going to be permitted to speak, or we're going to cancel their contract, and someone speaking at a university because they support Israel. That one is obviously much more extreme. And in terms of the book petition you're referring to, I mean, it is challenging. I would hesitate, just because someone has views I don't agree with, as long as they're not calling for hate or rhetoric. You want to read as many views as you can, I think. I don't think you want to be banning writers or banning. I mean, I obviously I don't want the kids in the high school or the middle school reading Mein Kampf or things like that right now, or some of the other white nationalist ravings of some extreme writers. But yes, we know there are writers who don't share our view of Israel and things, and you need to read those viewpoints too, as far as I can tell. I don't know the specific author you're referring to. I don't need to know, but I would hesitate to be canceling, mainstream authors or mainstream books.
I think just to add to Howard's comments, what an opportunity for Park. Really, I mean, what an opportunity for them to use that moment to explore that issue. What does it mean, and what is this time of cancel culture about, and how do we navigate it? If you think about the term cancel culture, when did you first hear that term? A year ago? 2 years ago, maybe? It's so recent, in our discourse and in our thought. And I agree with you. I think it's a time when, partially because it's so recent, as a community, as a society, and as a culture, we haven't really figured it out yet. But I think it's an important thing to figure out. I also think that, along apropos to what Howard just said, that often it's like that old definition of when it looks like a duck. And often you can tell the difference between something that really is unacceptable and something that's not. And then it's about how do you explore that, and how can you enter into dialogue around that so that people can come to a common consensus about which is which. And on that cheery note.
I know. I was like, how can we switch up? Okay, so we want to just say a big thank you to Howard for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for having me. Great turnout. Thank you for sticking around.
Yeah. So, and we also just want to say that, we hope that this conversation doesn't make people feel sad, but rather just allows us to have a look at the state of anti-Semitism in our community, in our country, in our world today. We didn't have a chance to cover everything we would have loved to, so hopefully this will be an ongoing conversation. Hopefully, Howard, you'll come back at some time. And I'm imagining that there are so many people out there who have a lot to say right now. So if you have a little bit of time, stay, linger, have another cup of coffee or tea. And our hope is that we can continue to grow as advocates for the Jewish people, and wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.
And there are some cookies left, and we've been told we can't leave until all the cookies are eaten. So if you'll